Hi, and welcome to Pam Branch Designs. In this video, I'm going to decoupage a blank wood plaque that I purchased at a thrift store with one of my rice papers. First, I'm going to give it a light sanding because the edges were a little rough. Then after I thought about it, I really didn't have to sand it too much because I'm going to be covering up the edges with some twine. I then painted the plaque with white chalk paint. After I painted the entire surface with white chalk paint, I allowed it to dry. After it dried, I then applied 2 coats of Mod Podge to the surface, and then I let that dry. Now that that's dry, I am going to adhere my rice paper to the blank by applying heat. I'm using my Cricut Easy Press to apply the heat. You can use a household iron without adding the steam. And what I'm doing is I am applying a layer of parchment paper between my rice paper and the heat. I have my Cricut Easy Press set to 255 degrees. I don't really have a set time for how long I press. It really depends on the size of the project and the size of the paper. I just press and then I pick it up to test it to see if it's adhered. If it's not adhered, then I apply more heat. Your blank will be warm to the touch, maybe even hot, so just be careful when picking it up to test it. So the edges aren't quite as adhered as I'd like them to be, so I'm going to give it another press and I'm going to pay a little closer attention to the edges. Now that the edges are adhered and the paper is adhered to the surface, I'm going to use some sandpaper wrapped around a block to file away at the edges. This sandpaper is 180 grit, but I think part of the reason that it's taking me so long to get the paper off is that I probably could have used sandpaper that had a heavier grit. So in order to make the job a little easier, I'm just going to cut away at some of the excess paper, mostly because this has curves and points, and I just want to make it easier for me to be able to file away at the excess paper. I could have probably also used an emery board instead because it would have been smaller and it probably would have been easier to get around those corners and to get into those tighter spaces. Now that I've gone around the entire perimeter of the project with the sandpaper, I'm going to seal in the project by just applying another coat of my decoupage glue. In this case, I'm using Mod Podge. So I basically continued to apply the Mod Podge over the entire surface of my project. Now, after I finished applying the Mod Podge, if you look closely, you can see that some bubbles have appeared. Now, what I did when I first started doing decoupage was I would get a pin and start poking at them and start pushing at them and trying all sorts of different things to get rid of them. But once my project dried, the bubbles pretty much deflated and went away. So if you look closely here, you can't see any bubbles. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to apply some twine just as a bit of decoration around the perimeter of the project, and I'm using hot glue. Now, while I was doing this, I started getting a little impatient and a tiny bit sloppy with the hot glue, so you want to make sure that you take your time and be mindful of the fact that it is hot glue, so it's hot. So just be mindful of not trying to manipulate it while it's really hot because you don't want to burn your fingers. Because I got a little sloppy at certain points in the project and things got a little goopy and there were some strings. After the project was done, I just went back around with some scissors and cut away at some of the excess glue and just made sure I got rid of the strings. So I essentially continued to work my way around the perimeter of the project, applying the glue and applying the twine. And then I essentially picked away at some of the excess glue that was on the project. So I thought that applying the twine would also serve to cover up that little bit of space, that little bit of white space at the bottom of the project, but it really didn't. At first I tried to apply a little paint that I thought might match, but it really just didn't look right. So I had to try something else. So I made a little ribbon out of the twine, and then I applied that instead. I actually ended up liking the bow. It added a nice little touch and it looked really nice on the wall in my basement. I have a bunch of family pictures there and I put it right next to my dad's picture. His little spirit animal is the Cardinal, so I thought it would be appropriate to hang it right there next to his picture. Thanks so much for watching.